have no idea what time it is down and under, but it is time for Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mecky. So I hope you have your tinfoil hat all made and cinched down tight over your ears. So take it away, Dave and Mecky.
Hello and welcome to Shiny Side Out with
Dave
and Mecky on WZZR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on, yes, Revolution.radio, where it's more than just radio. So jump in the chat room if you can. This is show number 463, 360 and 400, is that right?
432.
432. I was way ahead of myself. Like always, I'm ahead of my time. 432, 230, and 400. We're in our 10th year. This is the 10th year we're on the air, and we're talking about ancient tech in the second hour. First hour, as usual, we will go through some of the recent news. Now, Revolution Radio is on air, online, and on your smart device. So grab an app to listen anywhere, or listen at home on a Grace tabletop digital radio. If you missed Solaris' show, which I did, and there was a gentleman guest there, which was awesome.
Dan Willis, and talking about UFO global events.
Thank you, sir, and very timely it is, a topic as well. We'll go into some of that detail as well, if time permits. Now, if you did miss it, like I did, that's not the end of the world. It's all good. You can just pay $5 a month to access the Freedom Slips archives, and you can check out her shows, our shows, anyone's shows, and trust me, you don't want to miss Solaris' shows. She's got awesome guests, and she herself makes a great guest, by the way, just in case you're wondering if you may be another host out listening here, invite her to the show and interview her. She makes a fantastic guest. We were lucky enough to have a few times. So Solaris, much love from us. You're doing a great job. Couldn't imagine doing any of this without having you in front of us. That's really awesome stuff. 100%. We would like to acknowledge, as always, the traditional owners, custodians really, because Aborigines did have the same kind of ownership understanding as the white people did.
They didn't have the terminology for ownership.
No, how? In fact, since you mentioned it, most of the native peoples, non-Europeans or non-modern Europeans, don't understand how you can own land or water or air or anything that is just out there in the world. It's a complete misalignment of cultural understanding, which of course led to much bloodshed and eventually the almost annihilation of the Aboriginal peoples everywhere. But it's a complete mismatch of worldviews. Weltanschauung, like the Germans like to say. Anyhow, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. For me, it's the Darug people here in Pemulwuy, and for Dave,
Was that dark and young?
thank you, sir. And we'd like to pay our respects to elders, past, present, and future. It's an important thing to do that, especially in light of recent events. Things have gone sideways, something fiercely. I will talk about that, if time permits, after we've gone through some of these topic, or rather highlights and headlines Dave has prepared for us. So they're very important. So we're going to go right into it. And then afterwards, like I said, if there's some time, I will share some of my thoughts on a couple other things. But Dave, coronavirus, man, what's going on?
Yeah, right. So firstly, we've hit 10 million.
That's correct.
And last week was 8.5. So 1.5 million in a week's time. It only took 7 days to go up 1.5 million.
And overnight, just as for instance, we had 176,000 confirmed cases. So that's when So confirmed cases means people were tested, and we found 176,000 people across the world have it, if it's a thing.
Yeah. So that dwarfs any of those. Remember the first 3 months, Mecky? You know what? 80,000. Oh, crazy, right?
I have the last 3 months in a frame next to my bedstand, and I'll wave at it every so now and again. I wish I was there. It's nostalgia. I wish I was when things were. I wish I was in the place when things were bad, because we've left bad at the station. That's cool.
That certainly happened. So last week it was 2.25 million in the US. Now it's 2.5. So they've gone up 250,000 in a week. They're doing 45,000 per day. And it's exponentially rising. So that curve, it was linear before and it had a slight decline. Not anymore.
You know what's funny though, and I have to mention this because I find it amusing. So Donald Trump things, and look, I got nothing against the guy. Actually, you really don't, right? He's done a lot of things that other presidents wouldn't have, and I give him kudos for that. But on the other hand, he's done some horrendously unconscionable and really irresponsible things as well. But one thing, a nugget he talked about the reason there was, the problem is the testing. That's the problem, not the actual infections. Because the more you test, the more you will find. That's true. It's true. It's a logical argument. It's completely self-coherent. There's nothing wrong with his argument. But if you really think about it for a second,
we should stop testing. Yeah, because the numbers won't be so bad.
It's like having bowel cancer, right? Bowel cancer rates are dropping. Yeah, stop testing for it. People are dying from it, but no one is testing for it. Good.
Ostrich mentality.
Ostrich. It's defeated.
Mission
accomplished.
Andrew's dead from it, but that doesn't matter. We've won.
That's right.
We won.
Just a little prematurely, but sorry, Dave. I mean, some of the other numbers here are truly staggering.
It's hilarious. Yes, it's staggering. Look, I'm with you. I didn't vote for the guy. It's not even in, we're not even in the same country. So this time around, vote. And you know what? If 100% of people voted in the US, you'd actually get a clear, cross section of society, and it would, you'd be voting for and the results would be clear. Yeah. So you couldn't have any more votes than there were live people voting. And that would, put a crimp on those, those dead people voting, Mickey, that haven't seems to happen.
You gotta think outside the box. Get it? The double entendre here, think outside the box. Even 6 feet under.
Yeah, dude, right. They're voting outside the box. That's what's happening there. So look, the US is going exponential, and they're doing what about 47,000 a year. A day. Brazil last week was 1 million, and they've gone up 300,000, and now they're looking at, probably peaking around about 45,000. Russia's actually doing quite well. It's in the position the US was just a couple of weeks ago. They're trailing off. Their numbers are falling, and they're down to about 7,000 a day, 8,000, 7,000. India, on the other hand, India is rising exponentially. The curve is beautiful. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the curve that I'm showing. And it's a piece of art, Mickey, that curve that's going straight. Like, it's just curving beautifully. That's textbook exponential right there. And, I thought I was really looking for them to be linear, Mickey. All the whole country's, I'm can't say the joke out loud, but there's clearly a lot of doctors there. So, crazy. Like, they've only gone up, believe it or not, because they're only reached now 20K per day. But, going back a week, they were 15K per day. And that's a lot. Still a lot. But I think, like, Meki, you're going to agree with me, and I think it's because we're really not counting. There's not enough people. There are not enough tests. No. In Australia, Meki, we suffered initially when the virus broke that we didn't even have testing kits. So we really couldn't test anyone.
Correct. I mean, we've done really well recently. I mean, our testing regime is pretty good. We had a bit of a spike in one of the states that we have it called Victoria. It's sort of in southern Australia. And when we say spike, it's in the double digits. So it's like 45 people, 30 people is nothing compared to the tens of thousands in other countries. But again, luckily, we are where we are. That's a really good place to be where we are. And New Zealand is in a good place. They're talking about travel bubbles, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, even Singapore, Spain, actually Greece is opening up again, or wants to open up, but only to certain countries. And the Europeans are not going to let any Americans in now. From I think US
until
specifically,
2022 for at least, right?
Something like that, yeah. But go on.
No, just saying. Look, we thought we'd gotten pretty close to solving it, right? Having 0 cases.
Yeah. Look, some people in certain areas have thought,
so
quarantine not for me. It doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. So I'm an international visitor. I've just arrived. And I have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. That's going to crimp my holiday plans.
Yeah,
and at the end of that 2 weeks, guess what? You're going to be tested. And if you're clear, you're allowed into the public. If you're not, then you've got to stay in quarantine. And if you deny the test, another 10 days. Good luck with that.
Right. There are three things here I need to mention, though, Dave, in relation to this event. Number one, the death rate has dropped off significantly. Why is that? That is because a lot more young people are now getting sick. And I'm talking about people in their 30s.
Yeah, 20s and 30s.
And even younger. So clearly the mortality rate is low because they don't have that many underlying conditions. They're not as old and frail, etc., etc. So the mortality rate has dropped off, but the infection rate is going up. Okay, so the death rate as a function of the infection rate is definitely going down. People are still dying though, and the dying is significant. 500,000 people are now officially dead or deceased from this. The official rates, I think, are much higher, and the unofficial rates. Having said that, recently there was a news bite coming out of the States where they said, and this was like some university body or maybe even the health organization, I can't remember, but what they said is the official number for the United States is probably 10 times higher than because obviously it's really a simple numbers game, really. I mean, you got about 300 million people in the US, and they've tested about 10%, so they've tested 10% of the population or thereabouts, right? And they found 2.5 million people sick. So their tests are around 25% positive.
Yeah, they've done they've done 30 million tests.
And so So there are a lot of people. 10%. So the point is, they think it's 10 times higher. So rather than 2.5 million people, they think there might be 25 million people sick, which of course means there could have been 10 times as many people deceased from this, potentially maybe less, but rather than 128,000 dead, maybe 500,000 or even 1 million dead now, and certainly it's a knock-on effect. And globally, of course, I think that holds true. Rather than having 10 million infected, I believe, and it seems that this is borne out now by other independent bodies. It's nice when the mainstream media catches up to the fringe, Dave, isn't it?
I saw your post about that.
And so if rather than 10 million, there might be 150 million people sick. And rather than 500,000 people dead globally, I think we could now even be in the millions from the knock-on effect as well. People that can't get a intensive care bed when they need it. I mean, India, and especially India, had some horror stories about people dying in the corridors and not even being able to be admitted to the hospital, right? And that's just astounding that you would have that kind of thing happen to people. But again, I guess maybe it's not that astounding. It's just where we are at the moment. So the real number of people that are potentially sick here, and again, I'm not having the argument whether or not COVID-19 is real or not. Clearly something is happening, right? And the real number of something is happening is much higher than the official number, right? That's clear here. And a lot more young people are now affected. Therefore, the mortality rate is dropping.
Sorry,
that is a good thing. But we're nowhere near the end of this.
My nose is bleeding.
Okay, I want to be very clear on this. We're nowhere near the end. Whatever this is, okay. And I don't care anymore what anyone else says. This is a long way from over. International travel, don't plan on anything for the next 2 years, is my advice to you. Airlines, we're going to see going out of business like there's no tomorrow. Other knock-on effects on industries like tourism, hospitality, even studies. In Australia specifically, there's a massive amount of overseas students that can't come back at the moment. And that has actually an impact on the housing market, because a lot of those students obviously have to live somewhere, and some of them had quite a few of them had purchased properties here in Australia. So people are buying less, they're drinking less coffee, they're going to restaurants less. It's just less money going around to be spent. And if there's a second peak or second wave here now coming out of Victoria, let's hope it doesn't actually engulf the entire Australian continent, because if it did and we have to shut down again, the cost would be even higher, to the economy. And that's just Australia, and we're doing exceedingly well. So if we are worried, and I want to put this in perspective here, right? In Australia, they're meant to be altogether 6,900 cases of recovered people. We had 7,600. 100 people have died thereabouts, and 600 active cases are still there, with one person in intensive care. So that's the Australian scenario on a population base of about 26 million. Okay, that's where we are. In fact, in real terms, if you look at the top 10 countries, right? The US, Brazil, Russia, India, UK, Spain, Peru, Chile, Italy and Iran, and now Mexico and Pakistan are certainly inching their way up there.
Coming up, yep.
And in fact, the top 19 countries, and you really could include Qatar as number 20, are all over 100,000 infected, with deaths in the thousands. And there's a huge difference here in death rate. In France, which has 162,000 people officially infected, they have 29,000 deaths. 29,000. Whereas in Germany, 194,000 people infected, only 9,000 people have perished. So it's certainly shining a light into, I guess, the relative healthcare systems in each country, and how prepared people are, maybe, and how good the politicians are really at handling this. And you can't fault any people, but look, I'm looking at Brazil, I'm looking at the US, Dave, and India. India is, for me, that's going to be a horrendous kind of. That's going to be a slaughterhouse.
Though. Yeah, because their medical is terrible, right?
That's all I had on coronavirus, though, buddy.
Yeah. So while because the coronavirus has been such a tremendous distraction for politicians, that there really isn't very much else that hits the top 5 stories.
Well, that's right.
And pardon me, I've got a terrible bleeding nose, guys. Just letting you know. I'll be fine. But,
you okay?
Yeah. Just it's what I have. So, what I'm seeing, Mackie, is the stories that didn't make it to the the news cycle. They didn't make it there because they were, maybe shoved down the queue and, not reportable because of that. And some of those things, Mackie, like we've got in Australia, we have some Chinese influence stories.
Mm-hmm.
And we have what's called branch stacking. So these are some of the things that didn't really make that. They've piqued some interest, but they're not, they're not the main story. They would have been if coronavirus wasn't there. And also that fellow who, the guy that was about the bugging of the, was it Timor? What was it? The guy that the whistleblower that.
The Timor-Leste thing?
Yeah, that one.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember his name, but yeah. So, yeah, look, clearly everything wasn't well, and what we found out some time ago is that we actually bugged these people when we were negotiating the oil deals, because Timor-Leste is sitting on oil and gas, quite a bit of it, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
Also, it also shows our complicity, and I shouldn't say this, but it's true, I guess, our complicity with Indonesia to pretty much rob Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea by the same token of their natural wealth, independence, and autonomy.
Yeah, that's right. This kind of thing happens quite a lot, and probably more than you would want to expect it happened. Because, trade is trade, and it's ruthless, it's cutthroat. But, these are the stories that didn't make it. And they just didn't make it to the news. Oh, man, I'm probably a litre already. Good God.
Jeez.
Yeah, having fun. So,
get some ice on your bag, my friend.
Yeah, that doesn't really work. Hot water's better.
Okay.
So, what hasn't made it to the news, Mackie, is something really interesting. Vaping.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Vaping is now going to be illegal in Australia because you won't be allowed to import refills or nicotine.
That's very interesting. Is there a reason for that?
Okay, so the story, the only one that I could really find that, because every time you click on a news link now, you're being penalised by having to subscribe to them. So the story says e-cigarette users and retailers have turned to buying products from overseas because they're not made locally. And what the government's decided to do is importing e-cigarettes and refills containing nicotine in Australia to be banned from the 1st of July. New regulations are going to come in place on vaporizer nicotine. Many people bought the products from overseas. Oh, my machine is crankily slow. So Greg Hunt has requested that the Department of Health to work with the Australian Border Force on a new approach to trying to lock down, and because I don't think they can detect that yet in Border Force. Also, they're talking about liquids or salts, so anything at all that contains nicotine. Because nicotine, I think it's going to be really tough. The retailers had started buying products from overseas because their sale and use in Australia was previously banned. So this is
so glad I'm not a smoker, dude.
yeah. Well, I smoked for a while, and,
so did I.
And I felt better having ceased because I realised that the only thing I'm doing is giving someone money. Giving a company money because they knew I'd be addicted to it. And that's where I sort of found myself stopping. But Mackie, it's a little mind-blowing because they're not banning actual cigarettes.
Interesting. So clearly there's something must be in the up and up here that
maybe the
there was
production of it's coming from a country that is just north of us.
Look, possibly, but also heard another story unrelated though, or not directly related, where vaping has been found to be extremely bad for you, and there were quite a few cases of actual death associated with
lung is what they call
exactly.
It. Yeah,
right. So I don't know if this is a reaction to that or not. I really don't. But smoking in general, if you want to suck down those drags, that's cool, man. I used to do it. I get it, right? I'm not judging, but don't expect to run a marathon after that, right? That's not going to happen.
No. So, in my hunt for trying to find interesting news stories, Mackie, I kept going back to the same topic kept coming up all the time, and that is the Asia and the South China Sea, and the big issue that seems to be the most prevalent is the activity of China in the South China Sea. Their forceful pushing into the region. The neighbours that live around the South China Sea have fishing rights and whatnot around their territorial waters, and China seems to continue to relate their proof as being a map which was before World War II. So, they owned it all. We owned it all anyway. It's all ours. So you can bugger off. Now, I'm not going to dispute the map. I can't. I have no position on it, except for the Philippines. They're saying, you know what? We've got maps to go back before then. So, good luck.
Look, the truth is this.
You can't cherry pick the map, right?
You can make a claim on anything you want, really. I mean, if you go back far enough, and this is funny that you mentioned it, but that's what Israel is doing, right?
Yeah,
it's going back. Israel is going back 5,000 years. They have been here I was here. I mean, no offense to anyone, but people have moved around the world a lot, Dave. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
And they came from here, there, and everywhere, and a lot of this occupation predates any concept of a nation state. Okay, the concept of a nation state is a relatively new idea, right? A couple hundred years old, with France, them still being the first one. UK can lay, or Britain or England rather, could lay claim to be the second, and then others, come along. Germany, Japan had a really hard time inventing their national identity, but before that, there was no national identity. There was tribal identities, right? There was some allegiances, this and that, but now laying claims to certain areas of the world based on centuries or even millennia worth of occupation or ancient claims, or God told me I could be here. I think, Dave, we're going to live in the real world now, right? And in fact, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is who has got the power to lay claim, who's got the power to defend that claim, and who's got the power to ward off any aggression. That's really the only thing.
That's a good question. See, Vietnam and the Philippines have been raising concerns over repeated violations of maritime rules, and also their airspace. So their airspace is also being contended by China. Now, looking at the whole thing holistically, what is the natural outcome of all of this? So,
go on.
Will this be, because you're the historian between the two of us, will this be contended in The Hague, or will it be just forcefully adhered to by the country who's claiming the most ownership? Because no one else, Manila, I don't think, Vietnam and the Philippines are probably less likely to go up against China militarily. What do you think? What do you see is going to be the natural outcome?
That's a very interesting question, Dave. We actually, so I need to say something first here about the interplay or the relationship that nation states have with each other. Right? Everybody thinks it's all very orderly, right? We're all used to government. There's a parliament, upper house, lower house, or maybe not, depending where a Senate, maybe Congress, or or several parties, that share, a coalition, or maybe a single party in power. It doesn't matter, but we are used to order. Right, when it comes to government and how it interacts with its people, we think there's a certain order, and by now we think it's a natural order. That's actually not true. The natural order of the world is anarchy, right? And what we're seeing in the relationship between the nations, right, is anarchy. There is no one in charge. So the League of Nations and then the United Nations, the body we're dealing with now, was an attempt to control that anarchy. Because in the anarchy, everybody did what they wanted. They had treaties here, there, and everywhere, and you could argue that those secret treaties led in a large part to the carnage of World War I, right? And then, of course, the impotence of the League of Nations led to World War II. In a small part, it wasn't the only. It was a contributing factor. Now, when it comes to this, The Hague has got no power of anything. So if the United States or China or Russia or any of the other bigger players now, I guess. UK, France to some extent, maybe Germany, India, and Brazil now. If they say, I'm not interested in The Hague, guess what's going to happen? Nothing.
That's right.
The only reason The Hague was ever effective, Dave, was because there was a vested interest by the big players to get Milosevic, for example, convicted, and others. But the Hague or any of the international bodies, they can make all the rulings they want. There is no enforcement agency in the world
because they're toothless. The UN is toothless, can't really
Correct.
do anything. Yeah.
So either we accept that, or we all have to vote for one world government. Ooh, there's a catchphrase. So in a one world government, we have a world army, right? That then enforces the will of the one world government, whatever that looks like. Yeah. And at that point, we can force certain rogue players along to do what we want them to do. But right now, might is right. In international relations, might is right, and people will push each other to the brink. Think Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Who blinks first? Mm-hmm. Think of the Berlin blockade back in I think it was in the 60s, right? But these are things that are real, and there's no governing body, Dave. The Hague can say whatever they want. So it doesn't really matter. The outcome is going to be if China really wants it, and this is the time now, Dave.
That's right.
They'll take it. Yep. It's a dangerous time because right now everybody's weakened. The world economy is
it's possibly the weakest it's ever been.
Yes, I would say so. It's probably worse than the Great Depression because there are so many more players and they're so much more interconnected than back in the 1920s, 1930s.
We are independent. We were all independent at that point.
Correct. I mean, countries still have manufacturing sectors back in those days, right? Now there are countries like Australia where the manufacturing sector simply, virtually doesn't exist. I mean, some, but not really. And we're really interdependent. So now it's weakened. We have the economic crisis brought on by this pandemic. Travel is dead, and a lot of economies, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, depend on tourism. And everything that comes with it, including travel, hotels, spending on food, education, all of that, my friend.
So much. There's so much that depends on it. You're right, Mekki. I got a point, right? So if this was to come to who can show the most might, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
How will this be determined? Using might as And like at the moment, we have a bunch of freedom of navigation that's forcing the hand of China to allow them through. But China's getting, maybe a little bit more possessive about the area. Now, I saw some training that's going on with the maybe the Allied fleets doing collective training exercises for basically to brushing up on their land, like naval land skills. They're practicing landings and takeovers and things like this to small islands. Now, I mean, there's not that many small islands that need taking over, and it does to me seem extraordinary that happens to be what's taking place right now. So my question I think still stands, and I think you answered it though, which was how is this going to play out? And it's going to be might versus might.
Well, it is, but it's a little more complex.
Force.
Yeah, I mean, it's an immovable object.
That's right.
The question here though is, what are people willing to gamble, right? And if we assume that everybody was a rational player, like a poker game, yeah. But see, the assumption here is that everybody is assumed to be a rational player. So within political sciences and other social sciences, people always assume, economics as well, that everybody is a rational player. That is not true. And we know this because North Korea is not a rational player, and you can argue that Donald Trump is not a rational player, and other politicians and power brokers aren't rational players. You can always, but not all, most of the time, you can look at self-interest though. And the question here is this: would Donald Trump sacrifice New York City to defend Australia? Would Donald Trump sacrifice Southern California in order to defend Hong Kong or the Southeast Asia Sea? The answer is, well, unless he was in charge completely, I'm the guy, the dictator type stuff, there's no way that Congress or the Senate or the American people even would vote to exchange Southern California for the Southeast Asia Sea. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, most Americans don't even know where that is, or couldn't care less. That's right. To be honest with you, because it makes no difference in their lives. Now, geopolitically, of course, very important, right? But ultimately, if you look at everybody's sphere of influence from a geographic point of view, right? If America didn't have its carrier fleets, there wouldn't even be a question. China would be all over the Pacific, in the South, and in the Southeast Asia Seas and China Sea, and all that would all be under Chinese dominance. But the Americans have those carrier fleets, so it all becomes a trade-off question. And how aggressively do the Chinese or other powers, India for that matter, maybe Russia even, pursue this land or even water grab? How much is it worth to them? And especially right now when everything is so fragile. This is a very, very volatile environment we're in right now.
That requires very delicate diplomacy.
Oh, and we only have elephants. And
yes, I know.
Think of it as
in the China shop.
In the China shop, they're all elephants and self-interested elephants to boot. I mean, Putin only has one interest at heart. Well, that's not entirely true, but his primary interest is to stay in power, right? That's Putin. Yeah. And you look at North Korea. I think he is sick. The young gentleman.
Yeah, we haven't seen any more of him. Yeah, and his sister's starting to become more vocal.
Oh no, his sister's in charge. She's stepped back on invading North Korea now a little bit, South Korea, which is good.
But they blew up their own reception center.
They did.
You saw that, right?
I'll cut off my nose. That'll teach my face to look funny.
Teach you face. For looking at me in the mirror. Yeah, but they did that. North Korea blew up their own center. Remember, across the line of the DMZ. There's a building on either side. They blew up their one.
Yeah, so it's like, see that? Imagine what I would do to you.
To me, Mickey, it's like that dog that goes nuts at the bear factory. So at the largest collection of kids, plush bears.
Yes.
And it just tore them all apart. That's exactly what I see. I don't see that as a rational act. To
it's
me,
not.
What the hell did you do that for?
Yeah. But Dave, this is where we are.
I'm tired of looking at your beady eyes. You're looking at me. I know you're looking at me.
But see, this is the problem. And I just want to mention a couple of things here. There's so many other things that are happening right now. Right now we're seeing people at the riots in the States deliberately trying to make it worse.
Yeah,
we know there's a faction that wants to bring about a war in the Middle East, and have a battle at Megiddo, which you might better know as Armageddon. It's actually a place, and there are other people again that have an interest in fomenting unrest and sowing mistrust, even inciting race wars. Should it come down to that. Hong Kong is another hotbed. Tibet is a hotbed. The India-China border is a hotbed where they went at each other with clubs and rocks. Oh, I mean, wow, great.
Metal star pickets with metal welded to it, like nails in a board.
Yeah. We're talking like
bigger boards.
It's the Walking Dead kind of arsenal that you would expect to wield against the zombies, right?
But they said that they were brand new faces to their side of the border.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
And yeah. But look, it's the thing is this though, and there are other flashpoints across the world in similar situations. I mean, they're not quite as violent, but there are certainly people looking to gain something from this current instability. They're always opportunists, smaller nations, larger nations, it doesn't matter. So right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Russia were to step up its campaign against the Ukraine. Maybe even, some other...
Mecky.
Yeah, completely. Oh, look over there. Right?
What's that over there? Oh, where's my wallet gone?
Yeah. And this pandemic, and look, I'm going to call it that because I don't know what else it could be, but it could be something else. It's getting worse. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And when the northern hemisphere goes into winter again, I mean, there's summer now. And okay, summer, look at the infection rates in summer, spring, summer. That's where we are right now.
Yeah.
Right? You just wait because this is not going to be over in November, December, come January. It's not going to be over. It's going to get a lot worse. No vaccine on the horizon. A lot of people are working on something. People are refusing to wear face masks. That's cool. Don't wear face masks. No one can force you to do it. But there seems to be some evidence collected that it does stop or slow rather the infection spread. In fact, the American Fauci, was it Fauci? Fauci, his name is, right? Fauci?
Yeah, Fauci.
He said, Fauci, sorry. In a recent interview, he said, we told people not to wear masks because we didn't have enough. So we wanted to make sure that the hospital staff, etc., have enough masks to do their job. If we had told everybody that masks are effective, which it seems they are, because you can actually do the statistical analysis for countries where mask wearing is a common thing versus countries where it isn't. And there's a massive difference, right, in infection rates. Is mask wearing harmful? Yes, it can be, because it does reduce the oxygen levels. Okay, because you're rebreathing some of your own air. So you're not going to asphyxiate, but it certainly will lower your oxygen levels. So again, it's a double-edged sword. Having said that, he says, no, they are absolutely effective. But we didn't want to tell anyone.
Because you buy them all.
Yeah, you buy them all, then we don't have any.
And there's none left. That's right.
Let's think about it for a second, though. I've deliberately misled the public here because I said they're not effective. I said, no, they do nothing. Masks are no good. And in Europe, everybody has to wear a mask. Germany, you have to wear a mask. Asian countries, mask wearing was a thing anyway. I mean, you go to Hong Kong, Singapore, 2 or 3, 10 years ago, everybody's wearing a mask. Not everybody. A lot of people wearing masks. But the air quality is pretty bad, so that's another reason to do it. And it's a thing, Dave. Right now, honestly, I want to be very, very honest here. I have no idea what this time next year is going to look like.
Yeah.
I've always liked to speculate. I always had a fairly good pulse on things. I had a good beat on what's going to happen and how things developing. Right now, I have no idea. I haven't got the faintest idea. Will Biden win? Will Trump win? What will be the difference, if either? What's going to happen with Putin? What's going to happen, globally with other places? I mean, Brazil, in my opinion, Brazil and India, they're going to experience a crash, a complete burnout. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Simply because of the way the country is, or these countries are. Massive underclass. And millions of people living well below the poverty line. Social distancing is not even what. It's not a thing for Indians and Brazilians living in slums or favelas. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's so true. Mickey, the second wave. They always say that it's worse, and that's because you became complacent. That the first wave, it didn't get me, so it's hooey. And then the second wave is worse because of just how little protection people opted to choose for this time around. Yeah. And what we were doing with our releasing of our restrictions was just to find where it is in the community.
Yes.
That's what we... Pardon me. But because our numbers were so low, finding anything was going to be a positive.
Yes.
Yeah, we want to find it, so let's relax the restrictions a bit. But in America, Mackie, I just see the numbers are crazy. So over here, we've gone up like 100 or something, 200 in the last week, all in Victoria pretty much, and toilet paper is now once again scarce on the shelves. The toilet paper fiends are back, buying up all the toilet paper.
I mean, we know now. Didn't we learn this for the last 3 months?
You'd think so.
The toilet paper does nothing for you.
This is right.
I mean, I'm sorry, Dave. This is where I sort of, say, okay, human race, you're on your own now. I'm gonna walk out the asylum and lock the door behind me. If you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But I'm just. And because I went out shopping on what's today? Friday. I went shopping Friday. I met a couple of people for lunch. Left my name, phone number, and email address in the cafe in case they want to trace you, which is good. But I went shopping and bought a few things, and I wanted to buy some toilet paper. They said, "Oh, you can only buy one packet, sir." I said, "What?" Yeah, you only want the restrictions just came in again.
Yeah, that's right.
Now Victoria, which is where the spike is, and again double digits, not triple digits. It's a different state, but that's where the spike started of the toilet paper, right? Yeah. So clearly, it's no longer just Victoria, but it's across Australia. You're restricted to buy. I think what the restrictions are around toilet paper, kitchen paper, box tissues, or generally tissues, like any kind of paper product. It seems. Yeah. So, it's insane, Dave. What is wrong with people?
There's plenty wrong with them. So, Mackie, the last point that I wanted to bring up here was that our former Prime Minister that was knifed in the back. Metaphorically by his own party, that was Malcolm Turnbull. He says, and he's got a quote here, that China wants a compliant Australia, and we're not being compliant at the moment.
Correct.
We've joined not only the Five Eyes, but the Allies against, pro an investigation in China, and that's seen us being polarized, and China the aggressor in this, and saying no, only once it's all done, blah, 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 blah. Malcolm Turnbull has said, he says, China expects Australia to be compliant with its aggressive foreign policy moves, treating it not as an equal in power, this is Australia, but as a weaker country, according to the former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull.
Correct.
Yeah, he says anything short. China had developed islands in the South China Sea to such an extent that short of kinetic action, which is warfare, there was nothing Southeast Asian countries or the United States or Japan or Australia could do to demilitarize those islands. So this is the position from a former Prime Minister in Australia, and he's basically saying the same words that we're already aware of, that we can't stop China from doing it. It's possibly already too late, and short of warfare, they're not going to cease that action. No. So it reminds me of a video game, Mackie, where there was an alien force that landed in Earth, and their fence just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm. The fence around their perimeter, until it consumed the Earth. Mm. And I'm not sure, but that's aggression.
Oh, completely.
It's like a brother and sister. One's swirling their arms around and saying, "I'm going to walk in the direction of you, and if you are stupid enough to stand there, you're going to get hit by me."
It's not my fault.
It won't be my fault because I warned you.
Not my fault.
That's
right. See, the interesting thing though, we're no longer living in a bipolar world. So it used to be for the longest time. We talked about the Cold War, blah blah blah, communism, capitalism, America, Russia. Really, not really China, but America and Russia. That is no longer a true statement. There no longer are any superpowers like that anymore. We now have the major players are certainly still the United States, Russia, Brazil is coming, India is coming, China certainly is, but there's a lot of other countries that are now moving up the world in their power. And I mean, you can look at the nuclear capabilities. That's one factor, right? But there are other factors there as well, like industrial capability, GDP, relative wealth of the nation, and et cetera, standing armies. I mean, Israel, you wouldn't want to pick a fight with Israel, right? Because they have nuclear weapons and their army is exceedingly well trained. And most of the stuff they make themselves. They don't really have to rely on anyone else. Because for the longest time, and people don't know this, but before the 6-Day War, Israel had help from no one. People always think that America and so forth, they were always helping Israel. That's not true. The 6-Day War showed, though, just how powerful Israel had become. And it was Egypt that everybody had been trying to get into bed with, both America and the Russians. But when Egypt had its shorts handed to it by Israel in the 6-Day War, oh, hey, maybe Egypt isn't such a good bet in that area. And that's when it started, right? Back then. And there are other countries like that which are self-sufficient. Africa, unfortunately, you can pretty much write off in that power struggle. There's no nation in Africa that has any designs or any chance of becoming a superpower. But if China were to try for for domination, I should say, there would be other, and not just the United States, there would be other players like Russia who are sharing a border with China, India sharing a border with China, potentially even North Korea, even though they're allies, but you don't know what they're doing, the North Koreans, because they're nuts. Taiwan is still a entity to be reckoned with. Yeah. So there are nations that would naturally curb China's ambitions simply because of where they are geographically, right?
I heard that Taiwan bought like 70 F-35s or something like that.
Yeah, well, look again, right? I mean, it's not nothing. Well, in the scheme of things, it's probably negligible, but it's certainly something that they want to have. They want to have some certainty
at least
around this, right?
Yeah, it's a guarantee. It's like buying insurance.
And Australia is relatively safe. And I say safe because China traditionally has followed a policy of continental imperialism, similar to Russia. What does that mean? So Spain, Great Britain, Germany, France, Portugal, Italy, even they followed something called, I guess, external or satellite colonialism, meaning they would go places that are very, very far, especially England, and establish a colony, right? And they had to dominate the sea routes, the land routes, so they had to expend a lot of energy and resources to secure the supply lines. China and Russia, on the other hand, they followed something called colonial imperialism, meaning they just extended their borders. Like the Russian or the USSR had these satellite states hanging off it, like Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc. And China did something similar, extending its territory and influence. Tibet is an example there. So they're extending their territory rather than having a satellite colonial setup. And Australia is sufficiently far enough away from China for that to be very, very difficult, because supply lines, or especially at sea, guarding supply lines is just extremely tiresome and resource intensive. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't get invaded? No, it doesn't, but it makes it highly unlikely. I mean, you're familiar with the Brisbane Line, right, Dave?
Yeah.
In World War II, for listenership here, there was something called the Brisbane Line. Brisbane is, it's on the east coast. It's halfway up to Australian continent. Yeah. And they said, well, if the Japanese invade, which they would have done in the north, because it'd be very hard, and we'll fall back to Brisbane. Everything north of Brisbane, well, we'll try to get you back later, right? That wasn't an official policy then, because that would have been horrible for moral, for the moral outcome for the people. The morale would have been right in the toilet. But it was a policy, and the policy still stands. I mean, Australia, it's very difficult to conquer a continent and to hold it. That's why Russia was never conquered. You can't hold it. You can take Moscow, but then they just retreat back into Siberia, and then at Leningrad, Stalingrad. That's where the big battle was fought and lost. My grandmother's uncle was in Stalingrad as part of the 6th Army, and he was one of the few that marched out of the Siberian gulags 13 years after the end of the war. Wow. So he spent 13 years in a Siberian camp. But look, the point is that China wants to extend its geographical sphere. It doesn't want to have satellite things.
That's right.
It's very, very tough.
The fence out. That's right.
100%.
Yeah. So that the question about China's expansion globally is, given the supply chain issue to having satellites, it would naturally then possibly consume some more islands. I know there's some, Pacific stretching out into India that way, continentally, down over the hill, over the mountain hills, their mountains, into the South Pacific, South China Sea, moving out that way. Yeah, it all seems like a natural expansion. But at some point, their expansion is going to be, they're going to come up to resistance, I think.
Yes.
They've got two current carriers. These are traditional carriers, but they're building a nuclear-powered carrier, and I think there's only two others in the world.
Mm-hmm. So, if you want to stop World War III, Dave.
Yeah.
If you want to stop World War III, you just destroy all the carrier fleets for every nation. That's it. End of World War III. Because the nuclear exchange doesn't do anything for anyone. But if you haven't got the fleets out there with the carrier fleets with the capability to go places, World War III is not going to happen.
Yeah, if you said all the navies had to just destroy all the navies, then the planes, there's not much you can do.
No.
Just pocket bombing.
Yeah.
Right. I really do prefer carpet bombing, but apparently that's not allowed any longer. And the one that has yet to prove itself is rods from God.
Yes.
That's yet to prove itself, I think.
That's a highly volatile weapon, but yeah, it's possible. Certainly, the theory is good.
If you had gravity guns, you could bring a bunch of meteorites down onto your enemy. Yeah. But weather systems, Becky. The other thing was the rain is more than 15 days worth of rain in China is causing flooding everywhere, and the Three Gorges Dam is being emptied as quickly as the valves will allow, because upstream of it is one of the largest water masses heading towards it, and they're trying to relieve it. However, when they were relieving the Three Gorges Dam, there's, I think, 15 dams south of it which are now overflowing on their own because of the release from the Three Gorges Dam. And there's something like 400 million people living south of the Three Gorges Dam, including Wuhan. That's right. Meki, imagine Wuhan being wiped clean. No more evidence there.
The waters that would be released from that project,
if it failed, oh my goodness, right? So the engineers, there's been a couple of whistleblower engineers have said, look, we cut corners everywhere on the Three Gorges Dam. It would never last if it was, if water spilled over the top of it, it would fail. So they're emptying it as quickly as possible, but they've still got another, I think, 8 days of rain. And it's really not going to be pleasant. So I don't want people to die. I don't want the people to die, Meki. All I want is that the CCP, the actual party itself, the political party that's decided to be an autocracy, I prefer, I'm being generous, I'd prefer that failed on its own, because the other countries in the world who aren't communist are questioning their dealings with China because of their people's rights abuses, the way that they're handling and their diplomacy. And I think it's a question that was going to be raised. I think this was just the flashpoint to start to ask those questions.
Nothing lasts forever, though, and that's a truism. So eventually this regime will come to an end.
Yeah.
And it will be. It could be small and quiet, and that's great. That would be like an evolution to a new government, or it will be a revolution, in which case it will be brutal and bloody.
Yeah.
I don't know which way it's going to go, Dave, but certainly you're right. Don't forget, though, also the northern hemisphere is now going into melt season, right? So not just rain, but
it's not going to help.
We also have to do. No, the melt water is not. It's not going to help at all. It's not.
China has decided to branch out with daughter companies of their manufacturing in our countries. There's the music. so that we think we're buying something from a different country. And that's going to be tough for us for our manufacturing replacement if we survive this financially. Look, here's the music. Take the time to donate. We'll see you after the short break, and we're back with Shiny Side Out with David Mackey. You're back with David Mackey, Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com, on the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5 a month. If you're new to Shiny Side Out, welcome aboard. This is a tinfoil hat zone, so keep your arms within the vehicle, turn off your personal reality inverters, and please, no flash photography. We are glad you're on board, and thank you for inviting us into your lives. So follow, subscribe, or otherwise for the appropriate social media platform. We're halfway through show number 432, and we're going to get on to the show topic. And today it is Ancient Tech Part 11. So if you already caught this show, for instance, there's 10 other hour lengths to consume before you get here. Hopefully it'll be an easy thing to catch up on, and today is a great topic. We can talk about Vimanas.
Yeah, and I will share something else with you before we do that, though, because this is very topical and it's breaking news, right?
Breaking news.
I know, right? So I was reading the Guardian Weekly, like, yeah, no. Hey, this is just in from the front lines. A tiny figurine of a bird carved from burned bone is the earliest Chinese artwork ever discovered, according to a team of archaeologists. The carving, less than 2 centimeters in length, right, 2 centimeters, has been dated to the Paleolithic period between 13,800 and 13,000 years ago. Again, that number, right? Which pushes back the earliest known date of East Asian animal sculpture by more than 8 millennia, 8,000 years. Okay? So remember, Dave, how we said one thing that we will see, 10 years ago we said this, and we keep saying it every year.
That's right.
Dates will be pushed further and further back into time the more stuff we find. It's just what's going to happen. Now, it was found at Lingjing in the Henan province of China and takes the form of a bird standing on a pedestal, which researchers say indicates it may belong to an entirely original artistic tradition, unconnected to other ancient styles found in Europe or Siberia. So it's old and it's a whole new thing. And this is the important bit. I need you all to listen now. It's 2 centimeters long, remember? When you look at it under the microscope, you really see it was made by an artist, said Francesco De Erico, a director of research for France's National Center for Scientific Research, who is based at the University of Bordeaux. Under the microscope, you have to look at it in order to fully appreciate that. Okay, there should be some ding, 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 2 centimeters. Why would anybody make a carving 2 centimeters big of such quality? So it's not a toy. This was actually an artist, and clearly must have done many, because obviously to reach that level of sophistication, you have to practice quite significantly. Sorry, so that's just in very quickly. We're pushing further and further back in time the dates of our civilization, or of the things that we could do, Dave. That's really I wanted to quickly share with you. Vimanas. Now, what are Vimanas? Vimanas are, flying machines, for want of a better word. Many researchers in the UFO community tend to overlook a very important fact, right? And the fact is this. Well, it is assumed that most flying saucers are of alien or even perhaps governmental military origin. Perhaps another origin of UFOs is ancient India and Atlantis. And in fact, I want to go further yet and say maybe the origin of these unidentified flying objects, and it's all we're saying they are here, unidentified flying objects, right, like Tic Tac.
Yeah.
No one is saying it's a spaceship. We're saying it's a UFO. Now, in common culture, and now these days, in the vernacular, UFO and spaceship have become almost interchangeable. It's not that. UFO, flying saucer, spaceships, these are not interchangeable terms. They're 3 very, very different phenomena. A UFO is an unidentified flying object of any shape. A flying saucer has a very specific shape. And a spaceship is an identified flying object. That's an IFO. Okay?
That's right.
So just to be very clear, what we're talking about here. Now, but what if these unidentified objects? And we've made this point here many times in the past. We talk about inner Earth as well. I still believe, Dave, and I know you do as well, that we are the poor cousins living on the crust, Now we are the third world as far as this planet is concerned, and everybody who's anyone lives underground. That's what I think. Now, what we know about ancient Indian flying vehicles comes to us from ancient Indian sources. Now, these are texts that have come to us, through the centuries, through the millennia. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, they were written down thousands of years ago and probably existed in oral tradition many thousands of years before that. There's no doubt that most of those texts are authentic. Many are, in fact, well known, right? And there are literally hundreds of them. And most of them have not even been translated into English from the ancient Sanskrit, which was the language they were originally written in on. Now, this is going to mention something we've actually done a whole show on, the 9 Unknown Men. The Indian Emperor Ashoka started, or is alleged to have started, a secret society of the 9 Unknown Men. These were great Indian scientists who were supposed to catalog the many sciences. Ashoka kept their work secret because he was afraid that the advanced science cataloged by these men, culled from ancient Indian sources. So these are not advancements of Ashoka's time. He's going to ancient Indian sources and has them compiled into books by these men. He was afraid they would be used for the evil purposes of war, which Ashoka was strongly against, having been converted to Buddhism after defeating a rival army in a bloody battle. In fact, this battle, which was so bloody that Ashoka was, well, not to want to double dutch it, he was so shocked by the brutality and the destruction of and loss of human life that he did become a Buddhist, and he never wanted to see war again. And that's what prompted him, according to legend, to create this, secret society. Now, these 9 Unknown Men wrote a total of 9 books, it is said, and presumably, one each, we'd think. They probably helped each other out. It was probably some collaboration. Don't know, but it's certainly safe to assume. Book number 1 was called "The Secrets of Gravitation." This book, known to historians, but not actually seen by them, dealt chiefly with gravity control. It is presumably still around somewhere, kept in a secret library in India, Tibet, or elsewhere, perhaps even in North America. My money is either on the Smithsonian or the Vatican Library. That's where my money is, Dave. But we'll find out one day. All right. One can certainly understand Ashoka's reasoning for wanting to keep such knowledge a secret, assuming it existed. If the Nazis had such weapons at their disposal during World War II, Ashoka was also aware devastating wars using such advanced vehicles and other future weapons that had destroyed the ancient Indian Rama Empire several thousand years before. So just imagine that if the Nazis had that. In fact, I believe that the Nazis did find some ancient weaponry or some ancient concepts in some of the expeditions that were undertaken even as far as Tibet. So the German Nazi Reich did undertake a lot of expeditions. In the institute was called Ahnenerbe, das Amt für Ahnenerbe, which was, ancestor ministry, if you will. Because, the Germans believed they're Aryans, and they believed the Aryans came out of India. And other people believe it actually went the other way around. Don't really care, but the Germans believed they had this ancient mythical link with India. And the Rama Empire, and get this in the Ramayana, if you have got several hundred hours to spare to read it, is talking about horrific weapons that destroyed, in fact, entire peoples. And now, this is something I did some research in. Only a few years ago, the Chinese discovered some Sanskrit documents in Lhasa, Tibet, and sent them to the University of Chandigarh to be translated. Right now, when it says here a few years ago, this was back in the 80s, in the 1980s. That's when this was done. Dr. Ruth Rayner of the university said recently that the documents contain directions for building interstellar spaceships. Now, I did a lot of research on this, Dave, and I'm glad that we're doing it again, because what I found is Dr. Ruth Rayner was in fact at the university. She was she published a book called The Dictionary for I think East Asian Philosophy or something. So that's to a name. You can actually buy it on Amazon, cost you $50. And what I also found is a copy of her handwritten notes for sale by an antique, or I guess a specialist bookseller out of New York, but I got to double check. And that little nugget will cost you $6,000 US. It's something 40 or 50 pages of handwritten notes that are in fact dealing with the translation of the documents that she has that are being referred here now, right? So I'm you have no idea how tempted I am to get myself into debt to buy that manuscript. because it's out there. But the funny thing is this, Dave, those are the only two references I found to Dr. Ruth Rayner. The book that she published, the Dictionary of Eastern Philosophy or whatever it's called, right? You can look yourself on Amazon, and her handwritten notes. There's nothing in Wikipedia, there's nothing anywhere else about a Dr. Ruth Rayner anywhere. That's it. That's all she wrote. Now that's a whole other thing, and I'm gonna pursue that line of research for a little bit longer as well. See what I can get. Now, their method of propulsion, she says, was anti-gravitational, and was based upon a system analogous to that of lagima or lagma, the unknown power of the ego existing in man's physiological makeup, a centrifugal force strong enough to counteract all gravitational pull. And this is interesting, because according to Hindu yogis, it is this lagima or lagima which enables a person to levitate. Now, this is really interesting, Dave, because now all of a sudden we have two very different conspiracy theories, or two very different paranormal sectors colliding head on. One is the UFO group. I'm going to call it a UFO group over here, right? And on the other side, you've got the spiritual telekinesis levitation group, and they're usually they're not usually connected, right? But let's think about this here for a second. If there's something to the Hindu yogis' technique of levitation, if they can in fact levitate, then what can be levitated should be irrelevant. You should be able to levitate anything. You levitate yourself, you levitate objects, and if you're powerful enough, or maybe there are enough of you, or you had enough practice, or there's some kind of device that allows you to focus your powers, then why can't you levitate one of these craft, right? So this is a very, very different kind of technology.
Then humans could do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And this is when we start looking at this whole Merkaba, I guess, section of the fringe sciences. The Merkaba is meant to be your very own thought projected space capsule, if you want to call it that. It's something that you can yourself project outwards. Think of it as your space suit survival gear, right? But you are creating it with the power of your mind. If you take this for a second as something that could actually exist, ancient tech and our tech all of a sudden have very few touching points, right? And we have evolved so much that we find it hard to even allow for the possibility of its existence, right? So just let that sink in for a second while I go on here. Dr. Rayner said that on board these machines, which were called astras by the text, the ancient Indians could have sent a detachment of men onto any planet, according to the document, which is thought to be thousands of years old, the document that is. The manuscripts were also said to reveal the secret of Antima, which is the cap of invisibility, and Garima, and that's the secret of how to become as heavy as a mountain of lead. Naturally, Indian scientists of today, modern scientists, did not take the texts very seriously, but then became more positive about the value of them when the Chinese announced that they were including certain parts of the data for study in their space program. This was one of the first instances of a government admitting to be researching anti-gravity. The manuscripts did not say definitely or definitively that interplanetary travel was ever made, but did mention, of all things, a planned trip to the moon. So the documents were talking about a planned trip to the moon, but it is not clear whether that trip was actually carried out. I actually spent the last 2 weeks writing an article on the moon and the Earth and the Sun and the relationship thereof, and I'm hoping to publish it soon. But I can tell you there's a lot more to the moon than meets the eye. However, one of the great Indian epics, the Ramayana, does have a highly detailed story in it of a trip to the moon in a Vimana or Astra, and in fact details a battle on the moon with an Asvin. Now, this was thought to be an Atlantean airship. So just to be clear, in the Ramayana, the Rama Empire fights another power. They were called the Asvin, right? Now, some people have drawn parallels here to the Asgardians, or Asgard, which also is linked to Atlantis. So, similar sounding words. And in fact, Atl, of course, in Aztec means water. and Atlantis meaning the waterborne empire potentially, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff here. So this wasn't the Garden of Eden here. There were still people battling for power. So and some people believe that the Asvins or Atlanteans were fighting the Ramans or the Ramayan Empire for supremacy at the time, which, again, the timeline here, 15, 20, 25,000 years ago, maybe longer, who knows, okay? This is but a small bit of recent evidence of anti-gravity and aerospace technology used by the Indians. To really understand the technology, though, we must go much further back in time, Dave.
Yes, we must. I try to find
the so-called Rama Empire. Page 53, bottom. The so-called, you find it, then you tell me to find it. The so-called Rama Empire of northern India and Pakistan developed at least... You got it? Okay, go ahead.
It developed at least 15,000 years ago on the Indian subcontinent and was a nation of many large, sophisticated cities, many of which are still to be found in the deserts of Pakistan, northern and western India. Rama existed apparently parallel to the Atlantean civilization in the mid-Atlantic Ocean and was ruled by enlightened priest kings who governed the cities. The 7 greatest capital cities of Rama were known in classical Hindu texts as the 7 Rishi cities. According to ancient Indian texts, the people had flying machines, which were called Vimanas. The ancient Indian epic describes a Vimana as a double-deck circular aircraft with portholes and a dome, which, as we would imagine, a flying saucer to be. It flew with the speed of the wind and gave forth a melodious sound. There were at least 4 different types of Vimana, some saucer-shaped, others like long cylinders, like cigar shapes. And the ancient Indian texts on Vimanas are so numerous, it would take volumes to relate what they had to say. The ancient Indians, who manufactured these ships themselves, wrote entire flight manuals on the control of the various types of Vimanas, many of which are still in existence. I don't know whether that's the text or the ship. And some have been translated into English. That would be the text then. The Samara Sutradhara is a scientific treatise dealing with every possible angle of air travel in a Vimana. There are 230 stanzas dealing with the construction, takeoff, cruising for thousands of miles, normal and forced landings, and even possible collisions with birds. In 1875, the Vainmanika Sastra, a 4th century BC text written by Bharadvaj, I can't do that one, Mickey.
Bharadvaj.
Bharadvaj
the Wise. There you go.
Wise. Using even older text as his source, was rediscovered in a temple in India. It dealt with the operation of Vimanas, including information on the steering, precautions for long flights, protection of the airships from storms and lightning, and how to switch the drive to solar energy from free energy source, which sounds like anti-gravity. The Vaimmanika Sastra has 8 chapters with diagrams describing 3 types of aircraft, including apparatuses that could neither catch on fire nor break. It also mentions 31 essential parts of these vehicles and 16 materials from which they were constructed, which absorb light and heat, for which reason they were considered suitable for the construction of Vimanas. This document has been translated into English and is available by writing the publisher. Oh, it's an aeronautics. Mekki, can you take that?
Vimanida Shastra.
Aeronautics by Maharishi Bharadwaja. Translated into English and edited, printed and published by Mr. G.R. Joycer, Mysore, India, 1979. And it isn't the street address. Apologies. He was also the director of the International Academy of Sanskrit Investigation, located...
I just found the free ebook. I'm downloading it.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Done.
Good on you. It seems possible that Vimanas were powered by some sort of anti-gravity.
Yep.
Vimanas took off vertically and were capable of hovering in the sky like a modern helicopter or dirigible. Airship. Marhad Varj? I'm terrible. The wise refers to no less than 70 authorities and 10 experts of air travel in antiquity. These sources are now lost. Vimanas were kept in a Vimana Griha, a kind of hangar, and were sometimes said to be propelled by a yellowish white liquid, and sometimes by some sort of mercury compound. I'm thinking red mercury. Again, Mekki.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every fluorescent globe has a single drop of mercury in it, and without it, it doesn't work. Though writers seem confused in this matter of what propels the Vimanas or what fuel it might have, it is most likely that the latter writers on Vimanas wrote as observers from earlier text and were understandably confused on the principle of their propulsion. The yellowish white liquid sounds suspiciously like gasoline or something very similar, and perhaps Vimanas had a number of different propulsion sources, including combustion engines and even pulse jet engines. It is interesting to note that the Nazis developed the first practical pulse jet engines for their I think it was V1, wasn't it? V2 rockets?
Mm-hmm. Correct. That's correct.
Known as buzz bombs.
Yes.
Hitler and the Nazi staff were exceptionally interested in ancient India and Tibet and sent expeditions to both these places yearly, starting in the 1930s. And it was in order to gather esoteric evidence so that they did so, and perhaps it was from these people that the Nazis gained some of their scientific information. According to the Drona Parva, part of the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and one Vimana described was shaped like a sphere and borne along at great speed on a mighty wind generated by Mercury. It moved like UFO, going up and down, backwards and forwards, as the pilot desired. Extraordinary. Mekki.
In another Indian source, the Samar, Vimanas were iron machines, well knit and smooth, with a charge of mercury that shot out of the back in the form of a roaring flame. In fact, there's a power substance which is mentioned in some ancient texts called orichalcos, and we don't know what that is. Right, so we believe that it might have powered Vimanas or other flying machines. Orichalcos. Anyone who's got any information on orichalcos, please let us know. Another work called the Samaranga Sudratara describes how the vehicles were constructed. It is possible that Mercury did have something to do with the propulsion, or more possibly with the guidance system, which is interesting because Mercury, of course, under pressure in a hydraulic system would work very well, just the nature of the metal that it is. Curiously, Soviet scientists have discovered what they call age-old instruments used in navigating cosmic vehicles in caves in Turkestan and the Gobi Desert. The devices are hemispherical objects of glass or porcelain ending in a cone with a drop of mercury inside. It is evident that ancient Indians flew around in these vehicles all over Asia, to Atlantis presumably as well, and even apparently to South America. Writing found at Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan, presumed to be one of the 7 Rishi cities of the Rama Empire, and still undeciphered, has also been found in one other place in the world, on the Easter Islands. Okay, so you find the same kind of writing in both, and we've had a linguistics show actually dealing with this as well. We mentioned this at some other point. Writing on Easter Island, called Rongo writing, is also undeciphered and is uncannily similar to the Mohenjo-daro script. Was Easter Island an airbase for the Rama Empire's Vimana route? Now, we do something similar today, Dave. There are air bases all over the Pacific and Atlantic, for that matter. Right? It just makes sense for refueling and for, even if you take a break. So we're now dealing with a reality here where all of a sudden, logistical considerations of empire are becoming apparent to us as we're reading this. No longer just a fantasy story, but now we're talking about the nuts and bolts of how it would have worked. At the Mohenjo-daro Vimanadrome, as the passenger walks down the concourse, he hears the sweet melodic sound of the announcer over the loudspeaker. Rama Airways, flight number 7 for Bali, Easter Island, Nazca, and Atlantis is now ready for boarding. Passengers, please proceed to gate number XYZ. Right? It's sort of a little comical interlude here. But again, possibly that it wasn't that different to us, right? In Tibet, no small distance, and speaks of the fiery chariot thusly. Bhima flew along in his car, resplendent as the sun and loud as thunder. The flying chariot shone like a flame in the night sky of summer. It swept by like a comet. It was as if 2 suns were shining. Then the chariot rose up and all the heaven brightened. In the Mahavira of Bhavabhuti, a Jain text of the 8th century, culled from all the texts and traditions, we read the following. An aerial chariot, the Pushpaka, conveys many people to the capital of Ayodhya. The sky is full of stupendous flying machines, dark as night, but picked out by lights with a yellowish glare. Before I go on, it's interesting to note that the Chinese have a story of a man, and his name escapes me, but he was a hero, and he shot down 9 of the 10 suns that existed at the time. So it was very hot, though, apparently. It's very hot, and he shot down 9 of the suns that were superfluous, but he left the one sun, for us to keep. He was then given the elixir of immortality as his reward, but he refused to take it because he didn't want to leave his wife, Chang'e. Now, oddly enough, Chang'e is also the name of the Chinese moon mission. In fact, all the moon missions were called Chang'e 1, 2, and 3, and so forth. And she is the wife of this man. Now, Chang'e is a remarkable woman because her husband asked her to look after the elixir of immortality, and she did. Now, there are several different stories around this, but the most common story goes that he goes away somewhere, and his apprentice, who wants the elixir for himself, tries to steal it. So the only way she can prevent this evil dude, I guess, from taking it is to take it herself. So she drinks it herself and immediately has to leave the earth, to reside now in the sky up with the other immortals. As she goes, I don't want to go there though. So she decides on a compromise and ends up residing on the moon. And that's Chang'e, and she takes with her the Jade Rabbit. And that's sort of, the short story. But my point here is this. If someone were to write this down, someone of a non-technical mind, someone may have heard it from someone who watched it firsthand, handed down the generations. There were 9 suns in the sky, and they were coming to attack us, or whatever, right? And that maybe the attacking bit goes away then, but someone shot them all down, and he was a great hero. And now having the description here that this flying machine, in fact, looked like as bright as a sun coming at you, right? It sort of jogged my memory there, because you have to. Yeah, it does. You have to make the connections here yourself. It's just fascinating stuff. And this, of course, China and India are, 2 separate cultures with, a separate recall, but maybe recalling similar, if not the same events. Now, the Vedas, which are the ancient Hindu poems, thought to be the oldest of all the Indian texts, describe Vimanas of various shapes and sizes. And by the way, I have downloaded the text, and I've put the link into the chat room. Okay, anybody who wants to go to the link, you can download the PDF document if you're so inclined. Okay, and it actually has diagrams of all these Vimanas. Okay, and it's got extensive text. It's a worthwhile document if you're interested in the it's the Vimanika Shastra we talked about. Okay, I've sent you all the link, and it's free. You can download the PDF for yourself if you want. Now, these are the various shapes and sizes. The first one is the Anihotra Vimana, and that one has 2 engines. And the next one is called the Elephant Vimana, which has more engines than 2. And other types named after the kingfisher, the ibis, and other animals, which is interesting again, because that again brings to mind some Egyptian mythology, as well as some of the Sumerian mythologies as well, which display a whole bunch of different flying beasts, right? And maybe those are memories of the designations given to those machines. I mean, today we call them raptors, Dave. Okay, Black Hawks, Raptors, or whatever other names you want to give them, okay? All flying machines, we are still naming after birds of prey. Okay, just to be very clear. Unfortunately though, Vimanas, like most scientific discoveries, even then, were ultimately used for war. Atlanteans, again, the Asvi Empire, and if Atlantis is a name that you have a problem with, that's okay, just substitute it with the Asvian Empire. They used the flying machines, the Valixi, a similar type of aircraft, to literally try and subjugate the world, it would seem. If Indian texts are to be believed, the Atlanteans, known as the Asvins, in the Indian writings, were apparently even more advanced technologically than the Indians, and certainly had a bit more of a belligerent temperament. Although no ancient texts on the Atlantean Valixi are known to exist, some information has come down through esoteric occult sources which describe their flying machines. Similar, if not identical to Vimanas, Valixi were generally cigar-shaped, Dave, and had the capability of maneuvering underwater as well as in the atmosphere or even outer space. Other vehicles, like Vimanas, were saucer-shaped and could apparently also be submerged. According to Eklal Kuashana, author of The Ultimate Frontier, in an article he wrote in 1966, Valixi were first developed in Atlantis 20,000 years ago, and the most common ones are saucer-shaped, of generally trapezoidal cross-section with 3 hemispherical engine ports on the underside. So that's like the typical UFO thing. Remember, even the Nazis had that they looked very much like that. They use a mechanical anti-gravity device driven by engines developing approximately 80,000 horsepower. The Ramayana, Mahabharata, and other texts speak of the hideous war that took place some 10 or 12,000 years ago between Atlantis and Rama, using weapons of destruction that could not be imagined by readers until the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Dave?
The ancient Mahabharata, one of the sources of the Vimanas, goes on to tell the awesome destructiveness of the war. And there's a great quote here, Meki. I love this. The 3 dots lead into the first, and it says, the weapon was a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 1,000 suns rose in all its splendor. An iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andhakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Fantastic description. Meki, you would write the same thing, would you not, if you were at one of the only 2 times in our history, in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, if you were alive in the outskirts of the town and watched people die. That's almost a direct quote of how you would depict it. Would you
completely
not? I know, absolutely. Right?
Yeah. And it might not be a nuclear event, but it was a weapon of similarly awesome and toxic power, clearly, right? And most likely potentially a nuclear weapon. But again,
with all the power
we don't know.
Meki.
Yeah, exactly, right? And
hair and
ultimately,
fell out, Meki.
The radiation, exactly.
I know. So it does seem extraordinarily similar to what we've found this time around.
Mm-hmm.
But from the charge with all the power of the universe, which to me would have to be the atom.
Yep.
It couldn't be anything else. And like, I want to keep going, Mickey. It says,
yes, please.
It would seem that the Mahabharata is describing an atomic war. References like this one are not isolated, but battles using a fantastic array of weapons and aerial vehicles are common in all the epic Indian books. One even describes a Vinama, the battle of Vinama versus what's that word? Valix,
yep.
Battle on the moon. The above section very accurately describes what an atomic explosion would look like and the effects of the radioactivity on the population. Jumping into water is the only respite. Mm-hmm. When the Rishi city of Mohenjo-daro was excavated by archaeologists in the last century, they found skeletons just lying in the streets, some of them holding hands, as if some great doom had suddenly overtaken them. These skeletons are among the most radioactive ever found, on a par with those found at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Wow. Also, in the same kind of painful postures, Meki, as the Pompeii.
Yes, that's correct.
Lying on their sides.
It was in fact a Russian. Yeah, it was a Russian expedition. I did some research on that.
Yeah, right.
It was a Russian expedition that did the original excavations at Mohenjo-daro. There's very little to be found though on it, and most of it, I don't know, it's been buried. I get a lot of 404s when I try to go to websites. Can't find any first-hand books. It's interesting. One of those things that you really have to dig hard to find.
Wow. So you've got to know what the word for the next paragraph. You have to know what the word vitrified means. So I'll read it. It's ancient cities whose brick and stone walls have literally been vitrified, that is, fused together, can be found in India, Ireland, Scotland, France, Turkey, and other places. There is no logical explanation for the vitrification of stone forts and cities, except from an atomic blast. Furthermore, at Mohenjo-daro, a well-planned city laid on a grid with a plumbing system superior to those used in Pakistan and India today, the streets were littered with black lumps of glass. These globs of glass were discovered to be clay pots that had melted under intense heat. With the cataclysmic sinking of Atlantis and the wiping out of Rama with atomic weapons, the world collapsed into a stone age of sorts, and modern history picks up a few thousand years later. Yet, it would seem that not all the Vimanas and Valixi of Rama and Atlantis were gone. Built to last for thousands of years, many of them would still be in use, as evidenced by Ashoka's 9 unknown men and the Lhasa manuscript. The secret societies of brotherhoods of exceptional enlightened human beings would have preserved these inventions, and the knowledge of science, history, etc. does not seem surprising. Many well-known historian personages, including Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Krishna, Zoroaster, Mahavira, Quetzalcoatl, Akhenaten, Moses, and more recent inventors, and of course many other people who will probably remain anonymous, were probably members of such secret organizations. It is interesting to note that when Alexander the Great invaded India more than 2,000 years ago, his historians chronicled that at one point they were attacked by flying, fiery shields that drove at his army and frightened the cavalry. These flying saucers did not use any atomic bombs or beam weapons on Alexander's army, however, perhaps out of benevolence, and Alexander went on to conquer India all the same. It has been suggested that by many writers that these brotherhoods kept some of their Vimanas and Velixi in secret caverns in Tibet or some other place in Central Asia, and the Lop Nor Desert in western China is known to be the center of a UFO mystery. Perhaps it is here that many other airships are still kept in underground bases, much as the Americans, British and Soviets have built around the world in the past few decades.
See, looking at this in this light, and maybe Alexander could not be driven back because I don't think these machines are still being manufactured, because I think the manufacturing facilities, they're long gone, right? So maybe the people that were controlling them during the time of Alexander's invasion only had a few machines left. Maybe they couldn't use the weapons anymore because they simply had run out of ammunition. I mean, you can have all the guns in the world, if you haven't got any bullets, that's no good to you, right?
Yeah, so show of strength possibly, yeah.
Yeah, 100%, right? And it clearly wasn't enough to deter Alexander. Maybe it had been enough to deter other would-be conquerors. Who knows? But the point is, though, that the Nazis were very interested in finding these, right? And they went to Tibet. They looked everywhere. There are some stories that came out of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And also,
Iraq.
Also interesting. Yeah, exactly. There were. How can I put this best? There wasn't just a war going on. There were several layers to these wars that have been prosecuted in the recent past over the last 20, 30 years in the Middle East and in areas of interest like Central Asia. So Central Asia, Afghanistan, all the stands, Kazakhstan, and as well as the Middle East, they still hold a lot of secrets, and there were a lot of activity in unofficial channels, and a lot of it was completely dismissed as hoaxes or conspiracy nonsense, etc., etc. But one wonders,
might have been true.
It's true. Yeah, because again, you have to ask yourself why invade Afghanistan. And look, we have spoken about.
Well, I suddenly can't hear Meki any longer, which is very unusual. I believe Meki would have gone on to say, he might have accidentally muted himself, though. Meki would have gone on to say that because there isn't any proof that the stuff exists, but these rumors are alive, maybe it was to go into these countries to reap some of that technology. Maybe this was the thing. Meki, I still can't hear you. I'm going to just type into here that we can't hear you. Cannot hear you. So, yeah, extraordinary. Just extraordinary stuff. I remember seeing something about a story about there being a Stargate found, and possibly something interdimensionally, or something like maybe a Vimana or something very similar to that in Iraq or Afghanistan, in a cave, and that the troops were some were killed when they tried to penetrate the barrier. No, I can't hear you, Meki. Sorry, buddy. I don't know if you can hear me or not. So I'm just gonna say add and remove the mic, because we have USB mics. Yeah, right. I just suddenly just couldn't hear you any longer. Yeah, so it's crazy. Like, how much is how much of that about the war was not true? I'm just going to tell Meki, maybe in Skype, to reset the audio device. Technical issues. Who knew? Clearly, so yeah, absolutely. You got shut down, buddy. That's what happened, right there. So yeah, so I while those wars are going on, I remember seeing this stuff, and yeah, it was a bit crazy. So there's the next set. Where, yeah, okay. Meki said he's going to reset his tech, and he's I'm going to jump back in, but I'll take this. Now, there's some special cases, and in China, for instance, the paper making 105 AC, the invention of paper greatly affects human history. Paper already existed in China since about 105 years AC. Crazy. However, a eunuch named Kai Lun from 50 AD, and he lived from 50 to 121 AD, made significant innovation and helped drive its widespread adoption. That's paper. His advanced paper making technology then spread to Central Asia and the world through the Silk Road. Movable type printing. Now, the movable type printing with a printing press.
Hello, Dave.
There you go. Look at you go with the tech.
Hello.
Yep, I can hear you perfectly.
Hello.
That's really funny because I made a mug. I made a mug.
You can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I can't hear you. I cannot hear you. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I guess I'm back. I was just saying that that these caves in Central Asia, elsewhere. I did set this back to Skype, Dave. Hey, that's what I'm doing. Oh, this is priceless. Just make it interesting, right? Someone clearly doesn't want me to share the information with you. Not that you can't get it yourselves, but my Skype, I can't hear anyone. Dave tells me he can hear me. I have no audio at the moment, and there's actually nothing physically wrong with any of my machines. I restarted Skype just to let you all know. This is not a crisis of our doing. But look, I'm going to keep going, even though I can't hear Dave. And I reckon as soon as Dave calls me after the call, it'll be just fine. So Dave, call me after the call, all right? Paper making. Okay, cool. So Dave is now gone into the special case of China. Keep going with that, Dave. I'll do movable type then. Movable type printing. The special case that China presents is very similar, obviously, to that of India, and that's why we're bringing it to this year. And now the movable type printing is attributed to 960 to 1279 AD, right? Chinese invention. Woodblock printing was already widely used technique in the Tang dynasty. However, this kind of print tech was expensive and time-consuming. Until the Song dynasty, which lasted from 960 to 1279, a man named Bi Sheng, who was around from 990 to 1051, invented movable type printing, making it quicker and easier. He hardened them with fire. These movable type pieces were later glued to an iron plate to print a page and then broken up and redistributed for another page. This kind of printing tech rapidly spread across Europe, leading up to the Renaissance and later, of course, all around the world, and then, of course, to Gutenberg himself and the Gutenberg Bible. But, he was clearly preceded by about some 400 years here. Dave, gunpowder.
Gunpowder was invented by Chinese Taoist alchemists about 1000 AD when they tried to find a potion to gain human immortality by mixing elemental sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. It is generally believed that the gunpowder spread to Europe during the Mongol expansion of 1200 to 1300 AD. The interesting fact is that Chinese used this discovery mainly for firecrackers, while Europeans created cannons and guns dominated China in the mid-1800s.
Okay, compass, 1100 AD. A compass, is a navigational instrument that shows directions, clearly. The compass was invented by the Chinese between the 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD, some 2000 years ago. It was first used in Feng Shui, the layout of buildings. The energy flow and how not to build, essentially. By 1000 AD, navigational compasses were commonly used by Chinese ships, enabling them to navigate, all across the world, really. Arab traders sailing to China might have learned the technique from them and brought it to the West. Dave?
Alcohol. The inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula were widely believed to be the first brewers. However, in 2013, a 9,000-year-old pottery found in Henan province revealed the presence of alcohol. 1,000 years before Arabian invention. Alcohol is known as jiu, Jiu in Chinese, and is often used as a spiritual offerings to heaven and the earth or ancestors in ancient China. Study shows that beer with an alcoholic content of 4 to 5% was widely consumed in ancient China and was even mentioned on oracle bone inscriptions of the Shang dynasty.
Cool. Mechanical clock. Now, this shouldn't really be an amazing thing for us anymore because we've learned about the mechanism of Antikythera, which is at least 2,000 years old because that's when the ship went down that was transporting it. But here, the Chinese credited with coming up with the first mechanical clock, the world's first, whereas the mechanism of Antikythera, of course, was a navigational aid, also a star compass and a planetary little computer, if you will. Now, there were these first mechanical clocks. They were water-driven spherical birds, and they were invented by Yi Jing, a Buddhist monk, in 725 AD, so about 1,300 years ago. It was operated by dripping water, which powered a wheel that made one revolution in 24 hours. Hundreds of years later, the inventor Su Song developed a more sophisticated clock called the Cosmic Empire in 1092, 200 years earlier than the mechanical clocks that were created in Europe. Dave?
Tea production. According to old Chinese legend, tea was first discovered in Shennong, Chinese father of agriculture, around 2737 BC in the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907. Tea became a popular drink enjoyed by all social classes. Cha Jing, or the Book of Tea, written by Lu Yu in the Tang dynasty, explicated ways to cultivate tea, drinking tea, and different classifications of tea in details. The book is considered of the world's first monograph about tea, and the world's oldest and largest living tea tree can be found in the Lin Kang, China, about 3,200 years old.
Tea production. Didn't you just do tea production? Yeah. I think I'm doing silk.
Yes.
No? Okay, silk, which was about 6,000 years ago. Now, this is when it was first discovered. Silk, in my estimation, is a lot older than this. But anyway, this is the official line here. Silk is one of the oldest fibers, originated in China as early as 6,000 years ago. The earliest evidence of silk was discovered at Yangshao, at a Yangshao culture site in Xianxian County, Jiangxi province in China, where a silk cocoon was found cut in half, dating back to between 4,000 and 3,000 BC. Chinese people mastered sophisticated silk weaving tech and closely guarded secret, and the West had to pay gold of the same weight for silk. So essentially, 1 kilo of silk would cost you 1 kilo of gold. So you can now understand why the Silk Road was of such imminent and eminent importance back in the ancient days. In ancient times, the silk that was produced by the Chinese was a very important item for many centuries, and businessmen transported that precious item, like I said, from China to the West on the now much famed Silk Road. Dave?
Umbrella. The inventions of an umbrella can be traced back to as early as 3,500 years ago in China. Legend has it, Lu Ban, a Chinese carpenter and inventor, created the first umbrella, inspired by children using lotus leaves as rain shelter. He created umbrella by making a flexible framework covered in cloth.
Acupuncture. Now, this is one of my favorites because I believe acupuncture, along with the chakras and the Vedic or Ayurvedic medicine of India, comes to us from a time much older than we believe, and in fact much older than 2,300 years ago. Now the oldest Chinese medicine book, the Nei Jing, that we know of, also known as the classic of internal medicine of the Yellow Emperor, shows that acupuncture was widely used as a therapy in China much before the time it was written. So my point here is that it was written down 2,300 years ago, but it was widely used already as an established therapy for a long time before it was written down. Right? Besides, various kinds of acupuncture needles were discovered in the tomb of Prince Liu Sheng, who died around 200 BC. This is further proof that acupuncture was already in use in China more than 2,000 years ago. And I will put that back even further. I think that acupuncture and, like I said, Ayurvedic medicine are some of those things that came directly down from the previous civilizations as a memory. Because think about it. One of the most valuable things to remember for civilizations are its medical practices. Let's say everything goes to hell in a handbasket. We want to keep healthy, right? We want to keep some of our medical knowledge going. So doctors would become the new gods, I guess, in a way, right? And that knowledge would be closely guarded. That would be the knowledge that would be the most closely guarded medical knowledge, especially if you don't need medicines. But, if you've got knowledge of acupuncture, the energies in the body, even some simple herbs like in Ayurvedic medicine, that, and in Chinese medicine as well, that is the kind of knowledge that you want to keep. And I think that was handed down from master to student for, I would say, thousands of generations before it was written down again. I think we're coming close to the music, Dave. I can't hear anything, so I'll let you take the show out to our listenership.
All right. I really appreciate everyone being here with us. What you need to do is stay tuned for Jer Bear's great show. Play some good tunes. Be part of it. Call in. Be the thing you need to. And watch the news. Watch the skies. Read as much as you can. Get outside of your normal comfort zone. And watch how these things that we're currently exposed to evolve. Try to watch out for the news that doesn't appear in the top 5. That doesn't hit the news cycle. Very important. I think that's where things are getting buried these days. There's the music. Anyway, enjoy your week. We'll catch you next week for another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Meki. Broadcasting from Australia. You might have guessed because of the accents. Take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.